Episode 4 begins at almost 7 o'clock in the morning at the Avalon residence in Sakura's upstairs bedroom. Only this time, Sakura wasn't as tired as she was the last time. So Sakura, the first thing she did was to sit up in bed. And then before you know it, she went to the desk to go look at the song cards she had transformed the night before. And as I said, she wasn't as tired as she was the last time. So when Kero woke up and looked at her, I said, "Why are you up so early?" And she explains that she's been having those strange dreams lately. So even though Sakura says that she's not so sure why those strange dreams keep happening, but every time she wakes up, it feels a little weirder that time. That's why she wasn't as tired as she was the last time. So Sakura suspected that Clary must be in her dreams as well. So Kiro, who agrees with Sakura to say, "You know what, you're right about one thing. This is weird." That's why, as Kiro says in his case, that Sakura has to be ready for anything. At least that's what he told her. And so to boost up her confidence a little bit, that's when Kiro says, "You can do it. Since you've already transformed two so far, you're getting stronger by the minute," he said. So even though Sakura agrees, and then she says, "With you and Yue at my side, I can handle anything," she said. "I agree," Kiro says. "I know you will." And so, Sakura, now after she got dressed, she's on her way to school. But on the way there, she stopped by at the high school where both her brother and her brother's best friend was attending at. So, while looking through the fence of where Tori and Julian are attending at, they were having soccer practice that morning. So anyway, there's Sakura looking through the fence of Tori's school. And there's Tori, along with his best friend Julian, are having soccer practice that morning. And of course, she's very impressed with Tori's skills, and so were Julian's. So anyway, long story short, Sakura continues to watch her brother and her brother's best friend as the practice goes down the way as planned. So far, everything was going well, without any problems. And then finally, after passing back and forth between Julian and his best friend, that's when Julian and Tori both scored a goal at once. The audience cheered, and so were the rest of Tori and Julian's team, and they were very impressed. So Julian made a compliment with his best friend, and his best friend Tori appreciates it. That was until Ruby snuck up behind him, and she too was impressed with his soccer skills, Tori's that is. And let's not forget his best friend, Julian. So while Ruby was busy hugging Tori, and Tori tries desperately to get her off of him because he, as he says in his case, and his best friend are trying to practice. So while Ruby's still holding on to Tori, she looks over her shoulder to look at his best friend Julian, and she smiled at him. So long story short, after Tori tries to get Ruby off of him, that's when Sakura meets up with her best friend back at her school. So now that both Sakura and Madison had met halfway into the courtyard, that's when they started walking and talking together. Oh, Madison just told Sakura the good news that the new piano had just arrived, and Sakura told her best friend that she was more than happy to hear this news. Then Madison told Sakura something even better. She says that the teacher was so happy now that the new piano had just arrived that the choir can start practicing for the next competition that's coming up. So even though Sakura agrees with her best friend, and they can still recall what happened to that old piano, and she says that it was destroyed because when flashback, we go back to the last episode when the piano came to life and started attacking Madison for no reason at all. That's because they were unaware, as you recall in the last episode, that Eli had possessed it. And don't forget, Lee was also there, and he just found out what had happened from Madison, that for some unknown reason that the piano started attacking her whenever she sings or talks. So anyway, good news, all three of them had escaped from the music room after dodging the piano's attacks again and again. So after they left the music room, that's when they went up to the school's roof later. And that's when Sakura came up with a plan to distract it. And by how? By using the song card and transformed it into a star card, just like she did in the last episode. So now, thanks to Sakura's plan, her best friend is saved, so that's good news for her. Also, the good news, thanks to the sun card's form, so instead of attacking Madison, it goes after the sun card's form. But instead, it broke through the schoolroom's fence, where it fell down and broke into pieces when it landed on the ground, as we saw in the last episode. So long story short, back to the present. Madison just told Sakura, who would have wanted to believe the story about a runaway piano that was possessed all of a sudden, and what Madison says in her case that she and her best friend Sakura would be attacked by it. So Sakura told Madison, gee, you weren't kidding. Who wouldn't want to believe a story like this? So Madison wanted to know from Sakura that if she was unaware of who possessed the piano and why. So Sakura told her best friend no. And of course, there's no doubt about it, as Sakura says in her case, that something weird is going on and there's a stronger power than she recognized. Then Sakura says, wait, there's more, because she just told her best friend that there's some even better news. Since she had transformed two star cards so far, according to what Kero said when he told her earlier, that she's getting stronger by the minute. Also, as Kero told her, as Sakura told her best friend, that she needs to be ready for anything that comes across. And of course, her best friend was more to hear this news. So when Madison and Sakura were told by Nikki to come over here and sit right next to them so they could all have lunch together, and that's when both Madison and Sakura agreed to do so. And they set up with Nikki, Chelsea, and Rita. Now, I'm not sure if there's neither crackers or cookies that Sakura's trying out, so once she took the bite out of it, she seems impressed with it. So she wanted to know from Rita if she's the one who made them, and Rita said that she did. So long story short, while five of the girls are having lunch, the one that's up in the tree is Lee, and he just heard the girls laughing and talking to each other. So anyway, back with Lee, who's still up in the tree, he just couldn't shake that horrible feeling of what happened, and he just couldn't help but what's going on in his head. And that's when he heard Eli's voice asking him a question to say, are you hiding from something or someone by any chance? Or Lee, as Eli says in his case, is he stuck up there or something? So Lee wants to know from Eli, what are you doing here and what do you want? Oh, nothing, Eli says. I just went for a walk. That's all, Eli said. And of course, Eli, and he wasn't kidding when he said that he was getting to know both Lee and Sakura very well. Before heading off, that's when Eli told Lee, I hope we can become friends in the future, he said. And that's when Eli was asking Leah what he thought of it. Whatever you say, Lee said. Well, I think since that's the case, Eli said, that you and Sakura did get along quite well, and you two have been friends a long time, he said. So what's it with you? Lee says. Well, according to what he says in his case, and he's not kidding, he told Lee that how much he's been a help to Sakura and he's been supportive to her and etc. Or maybe, as Eli says in his case, it might be something that Sakura had. Then Eli told Lee one final advice. He says, if I were you, I watch your step. And then after heading off, that's when Lee has this puzzled look on his face. Like, what did Eli mean when he said that? Then, without warning, Lee went into a trance. And then after that, he fell off the tree. But luckily for Eli, he catches him when he did. And good thing he did. So when Lee looked up and looked at Eli, who caught him after he fell off the tree, Eli is asking him, are you all right? And then finally, Lee jumped up and leapt from Eli's arms and he says, I'm okay. And then he ran off. But before Lee can run off again, that's when Lee looked at Eli and says, "One final word of advice, just stay out of my way." And then after that, Lee heads off. So after that, Eli pleaded himself a case to say, "I don't think so. As a matter of fact, this is getting very interesting," he said. So later, back at Mr. Terada's classroom, it is now after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I guess school has just about ended, and that's when Sakura was asking her best friend, Madison, if she had ever gotten the home economics project done, which is the stuffed bear. Well, according to Madison, she says that Chelsea had did so since the night before. Well, Chelsea's cousin Zachary decided to ask Sakura a question. "Did I tell you about how the teddy bear was first originated?" he asked. So as Zachary, as always, is telling Sakura about how the teddy bears were originated in Canada and etc. And just when he was about to explain further, his cousin Chelsea, as always, just grabs him from the back of his shirt and says, "Oi, there you go again, telling stories again, eh, Zach?" And as always, Chelsea just drags him away. So after Chelsea and Zachary left the classroom, and that's when Sakura looks at her best friend and then asks the question, "Zachary's making it up again, isn't he?" So to answer Sakura's question, that's when Madison says, "Of course Zach is making it up. Then can we leave now?" Well, Sakura says, "Okay, sure." Before Madison and Sakura can leave the classroom, that's when they heard Eli's voice to say, "Hey, did I hear someone say that they had to go to the craft shop?" "You sure did," Sakura says, "and we are. Me and Madison," Sakura said. Then it's Eli's turn to ask a question. "Say, you girls wouldn't mind if I tagged along, would you?" "Of course not. You can come along," Sakura said. Then Lee shows up minutes later to say, "Wait a minute. If he's going, then I should go too, just in case." "Okay, you can come too," Sakura said. So now that the four of them had left the classroom, that's when the four of them were going to the craft shop. So all they had to do was walk a few miles up of there. When on the way there, that's when Sakura wanted to know from Lee if there was something wrong with him and that he was mad about something. But Lee dismisses it and said no. So Eli, who was walking with Sakura's best friend, Madison, and he wanted to know from her if she finished the home ec project yet. So Madison not only told Eli that she did, then back with Lee, he was looking behind him to stare at Eli a little bit because he can tell that there was something off with him. And I guess for some reason he just doesn't trust him. So anyway, long story short, when Lee looked at Sakura and asked if anything weird has happened lately since yesterday, and Sakura said no. And when Sakura asked him why, and he says, "Well, if you do need anything and if you're in any trouble, you know when to call me, right?" That's what Lee was asking her. "Of course," Sakura said. And so finally, Eli, Madison, Sakura, and Lee went inside the craft shop just the way it's planned. And what was Sakura looking for? Why, the teddy bear making box, of course. Well, Sakura didn't have to look for very long because there's the toy making box right in front of her. And she says, "Oh, there it is, right there." And she looked at it and she can tell that she was in awe. So Madison, who's Sakura's best friend, wanted to know, "Is that for home ec?" And Sakura says, "Yeah." And then she made a suggestion that if she makes a teddy bear for Julian, she just may give it to him as a gift. Not a bad idea. So Madison agrees with Sakura's suggestion and said, "That's not a bad idea." So Sakura was asking Madison, "Do you think so?" "Of course," Madison says, "because as the saying goes, it's nice to have a gift from somebody who makes them." And of course, she's not kidding. And of course, Madison also said that I happen to agree that it'll make somebody feel special. And then she suggested that she'll help Sakura in any way that she could, that is, if Sakura wants her to. It's nice of you to help, Sakura says, but don't you have a home ec project to get to? Well, Madison made a confession to Sakura that she already finished hers about a couple of nights ago. And of course, Madison said that she needed some extra time to practice for the choir competition that's coming up soon. So she figured once she did her home ec project early, she could do that. So Madison again tells Sakura, I can still help you if you like. Well, anyway, after Sakura thought it over and what Madison has said that she would like to help her in any way that she could, and of course she's not kidding. But after thinking about it, that's when Sakura says, no, that's okay, but I'll call whenever I need any help. And of course, Madison was glad to hear from Sakura, her best friend. Anyway, just before the girls can leave, that's when they spotted Eli, and he just bought a spools of thread. Well, that's a good idea if he wants to brush up on some sewing skills. Oh, and by the way, those threads that Eli just got, they'll be useful later. So anyway, when Sakura was asking him, you finished already? Well, Eli said not only that he did, but he wanted to show Sakura something, a bag full of thread. And I gotta tell you, that's a lot of thread, and I'm not kidding when I said that. And Eli, when he pleaded his case, and I guess he wasn't kidding when he said, Sakura, with the thread that I just got, you can sew almost anything. So after Sakura had appreciated a little tip from Eli, that's when Lee stepped forward in front of Eli to get in front of Sakura. So Lee told Sakura, I hate to be rude, but can we get out of here now? Of course we can, Sakura said. So Eli goes next to ask Lee a question. Did you find what you were looking for? Or maybe, as Eli says in his case, does Lee need any help with it? So after Sakura had paid for the toy making box, so later that night at the Avalon residence, it was upstairs in Sakura's room that Sakura got started to make her stuffed teddy bear for her home economics project right away. But unfortunately, long story short, in Sakura's case, when she told Kero that maybe making a teddy bear wasn't as simple as it looks, and when Kero went to investigate, that he can see that what Sakura said was true and said, I see what you mean. Then, back with Sakura, she felt something really, really weird. So Kero was asking Sakura, what's going on? But then, before Sakura can answer Kiro's question, that's when he too felt something weird, just like she did. So long story short, after Sakura had told Kero that she suspected it might be Cloud Race somehow, so they all went downtown with a dolphin fountain in the center. So there's Sakura in her gray star outfit, and there's Lee who's with her, and he's in his green battlesuit, and there's Sakura's best friend Madison, who, as always, has a video camera with her. Oh, don't forget, Kiro's with them too, and he wanted to know, why do we even bother bringing Lee along anyway? Sakura, however, just let slip in front of Kero to tell him, earlier I just made a promise to Lee that if anything weird happens, I promise that I call. And so here he is. And that's why we're here, Sakura said. Then Sakura also explains to Kero that they're going to need Lee's help at any chance that they get. Of course, Lee looks at Sakura and then happens to agree with her. And then it's Kiro's turn to plead his case to admit that Sakura was right. And says, well, I guess it wouldn't hurt to have his help after all, he said. Well, back with Lee, just when he told Kero that he had reached his limits with his list of insults, that's when something happened to him. He froze into place. He couldn't move. Now Sakura can tell that there was something wrong with him, so she asked what happened. Well, Sakura, Kero, and Madison didn't know that something strange just happened with Lee. Well, speaking of which, back with him, something just told him to pull his sword out and started attacking Sakura and everyone and everything with it. and Lee had no idea what is going on. So long story short, Lee had pleaded his case to say it wasn't him intentionally. Someone is taking control of him. Or should I say, someone. So when Lee tried to warn Sakura to move out of his way, but unfortunately she was unsuccessful, and the sword just cut right through her costume, but luckily she's fine. Then Kero, who just told Sakura what was going on. Lee has been possessed by something, or she would say someone, but he had no idea. So long story short, after Sakura had that thought that there's that strange presence again, and it couldn't have been a coincidence, and that's when on Lee's next attack, he accidentally broke Madison's video camera. Well, back with Lee, he told Sakura, "Go, get out of here," but she refused and says, "I can't just leave you behind, there's no way." So Madison has her turn to ask a question to Kero. Can't we do anything about it? Well, Kero says when it's his turn to plead his case to Madison. He says whatever's going on, something or someone is taking control over Lee's body, and we have to find out what's going on and what was the cause of it. So back with Sakura, she was desperate to save Lee in any way she could. So she says, "Listen to me. If you are in some kind of a spell, then there must be a way for you to break it somehow." So you know what this means. Aha! Lee has a plan for Sakura to save him. And how, you may ask? Well, he uses one of his elemental power cards the best way he knew how. Of water, of course, so that Sakura could see what was going on. And then before you know it, thanks to Lee's powerful element of water from one of the power cards, of course, guess what? What Sakura saw was unbelievable. Remember the spools of thread that Eli bought at the craft shop earlier? I told you they'd come in handy later. And I'm not kidding. No wonder these been possessed. It's because there's a bunch of thread everywhere. Well, back with Sakura, you know what this means. Aha, she has a plan, thanks to Kiro's idea, of course. So the only way to break the spell from Lee so that he could be normal again is to cut through the thread. So that's what she's planning to do. And by how? By using her star key, of course. So as always, as any person would do, she uses her star key to turn into a star staff, of course. And the next thing she did was to transform the next card on her list, the sword card, of course, and turns it into a star card, in which she did. So thanks to Sakura, who transformed the sword card, her star staff became a sword, just like her old staff did. And just before you know it, Sakura decided to cut the threads, in which she did, thanks to the sword, of course. So now that Lee is free from the spell, thanks to Sakura using her sword, guess what? The sword star card became the third star card on her list. So, good news, Lee is back to normal, thanks to Sakura, of course. Well, even better, also the good news, Lee will be fine. But for the third time, after Sakura transformed the star card, she passes out. Back with Sakura's best friend Madison, who saw what had happened, she rushed to see what was going on. Well, she wanted to know, "Are you guys okay? Are you both hurt?" "No, not really," Lee said, because he got everything under control. He calmed Sakura when he did, in his lap, of course. "Don't worry, both of them will be fine." When back with Eli, it was right after, long story short, that Madison dreaded that this was going to take a lot out of Sakura, more than she realized. And yet, Kero has the suspicion of where that strong voice is coming from and why is it happening. Well, anyway, Eli had pleaded his case. Speaking of which, back with him, he did say there are more uses for thread. He told that to Sakura back at the craft shop. But wait, Eli's not alone, because Spinner's with him. And of course, he's his companion. And of course, Spinner wasn't kidding when he told Eli that Sakura is getting stronger by the minute. So when Eli looked at Spinner and asked, "What are you saying? Why are you saying this for?" Well, Spinner says when it's his turn to plead his case. Well, Spinner told Eli to be careful because, as he says in his case, that he shouldn't be revealing himself too much. Then it's Eli's turn to plead his case to Spinner to tell him that Sakura doesn't know a thing. And of course, Ruby, who later appears, pleaded her case to say, of course, she doesn't know anything. And then she told Eli that Tori's best friend Julian, he didn't even suspect a thing, at least not yet anyway. So Eli told Ruby, we've been waiting for you. So I see that, Ruby said. Then Ruby apologized to both Eli and Spinner for keeping them waiting so long, and the reason being is because she had the guys, Tori and Julian, exactly where she wanted them to. So, in other words, what Ruby says in her case is that Tori, every time he tries to reveal his best friend, she wanted to try to keep it from happening. So, in other words, they were both in the dark, so to speak. Well, Spinner told Ruby that himself and Eli are planning a strategy, so he warned Eli to be very careful. Now, Ruby, who agrees with Spinner, pleaded her case to Eli. Spinner's got a point, because as she says in her case, that opponent like Sakura herself shouldn't be underestimated in any way. And of course, Ruby also says in her case that she also agrees with what Spinner said earlier, that Sakura is getting stronger. So after Spinner thought about what Ruby said and he happens to agree with it, so it's his turn to ask her a question. How's her mission coming along? Well, to answer Spinner's question, as Ruby says in her case, it will be a piece of cake, or as she says, everything's going according to plan. So, long story short, after Ruby had pleaded her case, Eli decides to transform his son Key into his son's staff. Now, remember, that's the exact same staff that he used just 3 episodes ago. And the first thing he did was to transform Ruby and Spinner into their usual forms. And of course, so did Eli himself. Well, Sakura has 3-star cards down, but there's still a lot for her to go. And so, what would Sakura do next? Well, to answer that question, it's the only way to find out. So that ends episode 4.